The first thing I want to say is that I never meant for any of this to happen. I'm not a hero. I'm not a soldier. I'm not even particularly brave on my best days. I'm Sergeant First Class Darren Hollies, 34 years old, from Knoxville, Tennessee, and 3 months ago I was standing at a refueling dock on the edge of the Calvary Reach with engine grease on my jacket and a cold protein bar in my hand, watching an alien girl try to stop a fuel manifest corruption by herself and losing badly. That's where it started. That's where everything started. Let me back up a little, give you the picture. It was year 7 of the Coalition Integration period. That's the official name. What it actually means is this. 7 years ago, the galactic sovereignty, 12 species, 60-something inhabited worlds, a military force that made every human weapon look like a kitchen knife, made first contact with Earth. Not in the dramatic way the old movies imagined. No mothership over New York. No death ray. No countdown. They just showed up at our outer orbital boundary, hailed us on 17 different frequencies simultaneously, and said, very politely, that they'd been watching us for about 200 years and had decided we were ready to discuss membership. There was a lot of panic, obviously. Then there were negotiations. A lot of negotiations. 6 months of talks that I'm told involved more translators than any event in human history. And then, because humans are fundamentally optimistic idiots who will shake hands with anyone, we joined. The Coalition Integration period is what they call the transition. The 7-year stretch where humans and sovereignty species learn to work alongside each other before full integration. Joint postings, shared stations, mixed crews on supply routes and patrol ships and forward operating bases scattered across sectors humanity hadn't even known existed 3 years before. I was posted to Relay Station Orvhan 7. It sits on the edge of the Calvary Reach, which is basically a region of deep space that looks like someone draped a nebula across a highway. Beautiful if you like your beauty gaseous and vaguely threatening. The station handles fuel routing for 3 major shipping corridors, does some geological survey coordination for nearby system clusters, and hosts a rotating crew of about 400 personnel, maybe 120 of them human. I was part of the mechanical engineering detachment. Engines, conduits, fuel manifests, pressure cycling, the unglamorous stuff. The stuff that keeps a station alive while everyone else worries about the glamorous stuff. I liked it, genuinely. The work was honest. The machinery, even the alien machinery, which operated on principles that took me 8 months to fully understand, was straightforward once you learned its language. It either worked or it didn't. Leaking or not leaking. Stable pressure or destabilizing pressure. No politics. No posturing. Just work. Which is why, when I came off a double shift at roughly 3:40 station time and found myself at the secondary fuel staging bay needing to log one more manifest before I could sleep, I was already in the best possible headspace for what I was about to see. Staging bay at that hour was almost empty. Low amber lighting, the station dimmed non-critical zones during the off-hours rotation, something I'd eventually learned to appreciate even if the first few weeks it kept making me feel like I was working inside a campfire. The fuel rack systems hummed at low draw. The smell of the bay was something I'd also gotten used to. A mix of ozone, industrial coolant, and a faint trace of something sweet that came from the Calvary native atmospheric processors. Sweet like vanilla but slightly mineral. Strange, not unpleasant. There were 2 dock technicians down the far end of the bay loading a manifest cart. Both Varathi, one of the reptilian sovereignty species, big and slow-moving and almost preternaturally calm about everything. They nodded at me when I walked in, which for Varathi was basically a warm welcome. I nodded back, walked to the secondary terminal cluster, pulled up my manifest. That's when I heard it. A soft, sharp sound, almost like a breath. Then silence. Then it again. Then a very quiet but very deliberate sequence of tapping, the kind you make on a haptic interface when you're trying to fix something and it's not cooperating and you're just barely holding it together. I looked up from my terminal. Across the bay, half hidden behind a fuel conduit stack that came up to roughly chest height, there was a girl, a sovereignty personnel, clearly crouched in front of what I recognized as a secondary manifest synchronizer. It was a compact unit, about the size of a large suitcase, that handled the automatic routing of fuel allocations across connected dock networks. When it worked, nobody thought about it. When it didn't work, All the dependent fuel systems started logging errors and eventually locked out. She was crouching in front of it with the access panel open. The display above the unit was running a readout I recognized immediately: Manifest Corruption Cascade. The system had flagged a routing error somewhere in its logic tree and was now proceeding to eat itself. I knew that error. I'd dealt with it twice before. It took about 20 minutes to fix if you knew exactly what you were doing. She was trying. She was clearly trying very hard. But she was working through the wrong correction sequence, which wasn't her fault. The standard protocol listed in sovereignty documentation was actually backward for the Orvhan 7 variant of this unit, because the station's engineers had modified it about a year ago, and the documentation update had never fully propagated. I watched her for maybe 30 seconds. Saw her try the listed sequence, watch it fail, try it again slightly differently, watch it fail again. She made that sound, that small, tight breath that wasn't quite a curse but was in the neighborhood of one. I thought I should help. Then I thought, is that appropriate? She's sovereignty. I don't know her rank. I don't know if walking up to someone mid-task and offering help is considered rude in her species' culture. I'd had some cross-cultural briefings, but they were general, and they hadn't covered every possible interpersonal situation in a galaxy full of species. Then I thought, she's going to let that cascade get to the third stage, and if it hits the third stage, it locks out 6 fuel routing channels, and we're looking at a 4-hour system recovery. So I walked over. She heard me coming. Her hearing was clearly better than a human's, because she registered my footsteps when I was still about 10 meters out. She turned, and I got my first real look at her. She was Vale. I'd seen Vale before. There were about a dozen on Orvhan 7, mostly in administrative roles. They were humanoid in the broad sense, bipedal, bilaterally symmetrical, 2 arms, 1 head, but the differences were significant. Vale were slim and long-limbed, with a build that always made me think of what you'd get if you designed a human for efficiency rather than strength. Their skin had a faint luminescent quality, not glowing, not exactly, but with an undertone that caught light differently depending on the angle. Hers was a pale silver gray. Their eyes were the thing people noticed first. Large, wide-set, with irises that seemed to shift color subtly based on their emotional state. Hers, at this moment looking up at me, were a pale silver, alert and slightly wary. Their facial structure was fine-boned, precise. A small nose, slightly wider set than human. A mouth that was perfectly human-shaped, but for the fact that Vale lips had a faint, darker tinge at the edges, like ink running just barely past a line. She had short hair, very short, nearly shaved on the sides, with a small ridge of longer silvery-white strands on top. This wasn't unusual for Vale. It was a practical style. She was wearing a standard-issue Sovereignty Station uniform. Gray-blue. Junior technical rank insignia on the shoulder, 2 small horizontal bars, which I'd learned meant something roughly equivalent to our specialist grade. She looked at me, I looked at her. The manifest synchronizer made a low, unhappy beeping sound between us. I said, that's a cascade corruption on the routing matrix. The documentation says to run the alpha sequence first, but on this unit you have to run the delta sequence first. Engineering modified it last year. She blinked once slowly. I realized I'd said it in English and switched. My Vale language skills were minimal. I could manage greetings and basic transactional phrases. But there was a universal station pidgin that most crews spoke, a simplified combined language thing that had evolved organically over the 7 years. I repeated it in pidgin. She looked at me for another moment. Then she looked at the unit. Then she said, in pidgin that was considerably more fluent than mine, the delta sequence before alpha, you are certain. Ran it twice on this exact model, I said. 3rd panel on the left side, you'll see a maintenance note someone scratched into the casing. Someone who'd been through the same problem. She glanced at the panel, found the note. I'd put it there myself 6 months ago because I knew whoever came after me would need it. Her eyes came back to me. That silver shade stayed calm, steady. Show me, she said. So I crouched down next to her and walked her through it. The delta sequence took about 4 minutes once you knew the steps. She watched my hands once, asked 2 sharp, precise questions, then took over herself on the 3rd step, and I stepped back and watched her complete it cleanly. The beeping stopped. The display cleared. The routing channels came back online in a smooth cascade, no drama. She sat back on her heels and looked at it for a moment. Then she said, still looking at the unit, I was told this station had updated documentation. It's supposed to, I said. It's been a known gap for a while. That is a systems failure, she said, flat. Not a complaint, just an observation, a correct one. Yeah, I agreed. She turned her head and looked at me. The silver in her eyes had shifted slightly, just a shade warmer. You are from the Human Engineering Detachment. Sergeant Darren Hollies, I said. Yeah. Specialist Sci-Fi Theln, she said. Secondary Technical Support, Administrative Corridor 7. Good to meet you, I said. She considered this. Vale, I'd learned, were not casual with social rituals. They took greetings and introductions seriously, not as formalities, but as actual communications of intent. She gave me a small, precise nod that I understood was the Vale version of the same sentiment. The note in the casing, she said, you wrote it. It wasn't a question. She'd looked at it and worked it out. Yeah, I said. You wrote it for the next technician, she said. Seemed practical. It is, she stood, brushed a faint trace of dust from her knee with two careful fingers. Thank you, Sergeant Hollies. Darren's fine. She looked at me again. Darren, she repeated, seemed to test the word slightly, then nodded once more and picked up her equipment case and walked back toward the corridor entrance. I watched her go. Then I turned back to my own terminal and finished my manifest. Went to my bunk, should have slept immediately. Didn't for a while. That was the first time. The second time was 11 days later. I was in the station's secondary maintenance corridor, a long, narrow passage that ran parallel to the hull on the station's port side, full of conduit junctions and pressure regulators and the ambient sound of the station's circulation systems, which at that depth sounded a bit like slow, steady breathing. I was replacing a cracked pressure coupling, routine, slightly annoying because the access was tight and my hands were not small. I had my kit open on the deck beside me, head half inside a conduit housing, and I was running mostly on muscle memory and the knowledge that I had to finish this before the next pressure cycle. Footsteps, light, measured, someone who moved like they were thinking about where their feet went. I pulled my head out. Sci-Fi Theln was standing about 4 meters down the corridor, reading something on a handheld slate. She was clearly doing a systems check of some kind. She'd stop at a junction, enter something on the slate, move on. She hadn't noticed me yet. I noticed several things about her that I hadn't quite registered the first time, mostly because the first time I'd been focused on the manifold problem, and then she'd been walking away. She moved with a precision that I'd now recognized as distinctly Vale. Not stiff, Vale weren't stiff. They were actually quite fluid when they moved, but deliberate. Like every motion was considered. Like there was a slight delay between intention and action while something in between calculated the most efficient path. She paused at a junction, made an entry on her slate, looked up. Saw me. Neither of us said anything for a second. Pressure coupling, I said, holding up the cracked piece I'd just removed. She glanced at it. Hairline fracture through the secondary wall, she said. The microstress pattern on the edge suggests it began near a thermal fluctuation point. I looked at it, she was right. The fracture edge had that particular radiating pattern that meant it had started under heat stress. You do thermal analysis on conduit hardware just by looking at it, I asked. Vale have broader spectral vision than humans, she said, not like she was showing off, just explaining. I can see certain temperature-related stress patterns in materials. That's incredibly useful. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. Vale smiles didn't work the same way human smiles did, at least not the ones I'd seen. But her eyes warmed a shade, pale silver to something slightly amber at the edges. It is sometimes useful, she allowed. She came closer, looked at the conduit housing I'd been working in. The replacement coupling, have you verified the pressure rating? I was about to. May I? I handed it to her. She turned it in her fingers, tilted it toward the corridor lighting, made a small sound that I was coming to understand, meant she'd confirmed something. This is rated correctly, she said, handing it back. There is also a secondary stress indicator running along the main conduit about 40 centimeters to your right. Not critical yet. You would want to note it. I looked where she was pointing. I couldn't see whatever she was seeing. My human eyes weren't picking up the stress signature she could detect. But I pulled out my thermal scanner and ran it, and sure enough, there was a faint reading consistent with early-stage material fatigue. "Good catch," I said. "Note it for the next maintenance cycle," she said. "It will need replacement before year's end." She said it as naturally as someone telling you to remember to water a plant. No ceremony, just the right thing passed to the right person. "I logged it, thanks." She nodded, moved back to her own path, then stopped. "Darren," she said without turning. "Yeah." "The documentation gap on the synchronizer unit. I submitted a correction report to the station's systems manager." I blinked. "You didn't have to do that." "The gap exists," she said. "It should be corrected." She looked back over her shoulder. Her eyes were that steady silver again. "Someone else will work that unit. They should not have to search for a scratched note in a casing." She walked on. I stayed with that for a moment. Then I finished my coupling replacement, logged the secondary stress indicator, and spent the rest of the shift thinking about nothing in particular while also thinking about silver eyes that could see heat in metal. After that, it was less dramatic than you'd think. We started running into each other regularly. The station was big enough that 2 crew members could go weeks without crossing paths if they were in different corridors, but technical support and engineering shared 3 significant overlapping areas: the maintenance corridors, the fuel staging bays, and the shared parts inventory room, a space that felt like the world's strangest hardware store, stocked with components for about 40 different mechanical systems from 6 different species engineering traditions. We started talking there. In the inventory room, mostly, because both of us had reason to be there regularly, and the room itself was almost always quiet. Most people put in parts requests through the system and had them delivered, but Sci-Fi and I both had the habit of coming in person because we liked to physically inspect components before using them. She found this interesting about me. She told me so one afternoon when we were both in the back section of the inventory room looking at conduit materials. "Most humans," she said, "appear to prefer the abstraction of system requests over direct examination." "Most humans grew up in a culture where the abstraction usually works," I said. "I grew up helping my uncle fix trucks. If you want to know if a part is good, you look at it." "Your uncle repaired vehicles." "On a farm, old diesel trucks mostly, tractors, a couple of harvesters." She turned a fitting over in her hands. "Agricultural machinery." "Yeah. On Earth. Tennessee, you know where that is." She gave me a thoughtful look. "I have studied basic Earth geographic divisions," she said, which was, given that she was an alien who hadn't known Earth existed until 7 years ago, actually impressive. "Southern region, elevated terrain, known for significant biological diversity." "Appalachian Mountains," I said. "Lots of trees. My family's been there for about 200 years. She was quiet for a moment. "Vale do not have the same concept of generational land attachment," she said. "We relocate based on assignment and function, but I have read about it in human cultural documentation." A pause. "It seems significant to humans." "It is," I said. "I mean, I'm here 1,000,000 miles from home, but knowing those mountains are there, it matters." She looked at me carefully. That precise, unhurried look she had that always made me feel like she was actually hearing what I said rather than waiting for her turn to speak. "I think I understand that," she said. "Not from experience, but I think I understand it." That was the conversation where I started to actually see her. Not just a Sovereignty crew member. Not just someone useful who happened to be Vale. But Sci-Fi specifically, with her specific way of thinking, her specific way of moving through the world. She was precise in a way that went beyond species characteristic. This wasn't just Vale culture. This was her. She never said anything she didn't mean, and she never meant anything she didn't say. She was careful with observations, patient with analysis, and when she gave an opinion, it was considered. She was also, I was slowly realizing, very funny, in a completely deadpan way that was easy to miss if you weren't listening closely. The kind of dry, bone-dry humor that just slipped into sentences without announcement and was gone before you could be sure it was there. There was a day in the inventory room when I was trying to find a replacement component for an old Varathi fuel valve, a discontinued part that the parts catalog claimed existed, but that nobody could locate, and she watched me search for about 5 minutes before saying quietly, The parts catalog was last fully reconciled approximately 9 years ago, before this station acquired its current Varathi systems. I stopped searching, looked at her. "So the part doesn't exist," I said. "In the catalog it exists definitively," she said. "In the physical inventory it exists theoretically." A brief pause. "I would suggest the theoretical version." She was completely serious, and also making a joke, both at the same time. I laughed, actually laughed, the kind you don't plan, and she looked at me with something that I was starting to recognize as her version of satisfaction. She liked making me laugh. I don't know when I noticed that, but I noticed it. About 6 weeks after we met, there was a long shift day where we both ended up finishing at almost the same time, 2100 station hours, late enough that the main corridors were quiet. We fell into step without discussion, heading toward the crew section. The station's observation corridor ran along a transparent section of outer hull on the upper residential level. At night, station night, it was usually empty, and the view through the hull panels was the unfiltered Calvary Reach. The nebula in layered ribbons of blue and green and deep violet, stars scattered through it like someone had thrown salt across velvet. We stopped there without planning to. For maybe 10 minutes we stood there and looked at it. She was a few feet to my left. I could see her reflection faintly in the transparent hull panel. Her eyes were looking out at the nebula, and in the ambient glow of the Reach, they'd shifted to a very faint, very pale blue. "Did you ever think," I said eventually, "back before contact, that there was this much out here?" She was quiet for a moment. "I never thought about Earth's perspective of contact," she said. "I should have." "What was your perspective?" "Fear," I said. "First, mostly fear, then, I don't know, curiosity. Humans can't suppress curiosity for long. It overrides the fear eventually." "That is documented in sovereignty observations," she said. "Your species' adaptability was considered one of the primary arguments for integration candidacy." "We're adaptable because we're stubborn," I said. "We just refuse to stay scared of anything for too long." She turned to look at me. "Is that what it is?" "That's what it feels like from the inside." She looked back at the nebula. "I was 12 when contact occurred," she said. "In Veil terms, that is approximately equivalent to 15 or 16 in human developmental terms. I was in my second educational cycle. My primary teacher showed our class the first transmission from Earth, the official coalition response to the contact hail." "What did you think?" "I thought the language was very strange," she said, "and that the concept of nation-states seemed inefficient." A pause. "And that the planet was very beautiful in the visual feed." "It is," I said. "It is really beautiful." "You miss it." "It wasn't a question." "Yeah," I said. "Every day a little, not in a crippling way, just it's there. Like a sound you're so used to that you only notice it when it stops." She was quiet again. The nebula did what nebulas do, shifted almost imperceptibly, light moving through gas at astronomical scales, slow enough that you had to watch for a while before you could see it moving at all. "The Veil home system," she said, "is in a region that has very little open nebula, very clean sky, very clear, lots of visible stars." A very slight pause. "I find this region distracting. There is always more to look at than I have time to process." "Is that bad?" "No," she said. "It is unfamiliar, but not bad." She looked at the Reach. "My mother would have found it beautiful." Past tense, I noticed it, didn't ask. "I think she'd be right," I said simply. We stood there a while longer. Eventually we walked to our respective corridors and said good night. That was the first time she'd said anything about family, or anything past tense, or anything that sounded like the beginning of a real story rather than just a fact. I thought about her mother for a long time. Things got complicated on a Tuesday. Or what I was calling Tuesday. The station used a 30-hour rotation, and my internal clock had been arguing with it for 7 months. I was at my workstation in the engineering bay when my buddy Corporal Tomas Vrek, Tomas was human, from Gdansk, with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow and an opinion about everything, dropped into the seat across from me and said without preamble, "You're spending a lot of time with the Veil girl." I looked up from my calibration screen. "Specialist Theln." "That's her." "We work in overlapping areas," I said. "You two were in the observation corridor for 40 minutes last Tuesday," he said. You're tracking my movements. I was in the corridor for 20 seconds, and you didn't notice, because you were too busy having a deep conversation about something with an alien. She's not, I stopped. It's a professional relationship, Tomas. He gave me the look that said, I have known you for 3 years and I can tell when you're being deliberately obtuse. She's sovereignty, he said, not like it was an objection, more like he was laying out a fact. I'm aware. You know there are protocols. I'm aware of that too. He picked up a stylus from my desk, turned it in his fingers. You like her. I stopped again, thought about silver eyes shifting to blue in the nebula light, about her saying her mother would have found it beautiful, about her looking at me when I laughed like she was filing the moment away somewhere. She's a good person, I said finally. She's sharp, she's honest, she's different from anyone I've ever met. Yeah, I like talking to her. Tomas looked at me for a long moment. That sounds like a lot more than professional. It doesn't matter what it sounds like. He put the stylus down, doesn't it? I didn't answer that. He leaned forward slightly. Look, I'm not saying anything bad, okay? Integration's real, it's happening, the rules are changing. There are already mixed species civilian partnerships on some of the core stations. But this is a military posting, and she's sovereignty, and there are people in that organization, specifically certain people in that organization, who will make it difficult if they think a human is getting too close to one of theirs. Meaning what? Meaning there's a Veil commander on this station, Tomas said carefully, named Vreth Kalan. He's in charge of sovereignty security operations here, runs a tight ship, and he has very defined opinions about the separation between sovereignty personnel and integration period human staff. I'd heard the name, hadn't personally encountered him. He operated mostly in the security and operational command sections, different world from the engineering bays. I don't think I'm causing any issues, I said. I'm not saying you are, Tomas said. I'm saying just be aware, okay? Be aware of the environment. I said I was. He nodded, picked up his coffee substitute, and changed the subject. But I thought about it after. Vreth Kalan. I pulled up his public service record out of curiosity that evening. Commander of Sovereignty Security Operations, Orvhin 7, 17 years of service. His species, Veil. Veil, same as Sci-Fi. The service record was public-facing only, so it didn't tell me much beyond rank, posting, and length of service. But there was a profile image. He looked nothing like what I'd expected from the name Warlord Commander, which, to be fair, was a translation artifact, not his actual title. He was tall for Veil. Broader through the shoulders than any Veil I'd seen on the station. His eyes in the profile image were a steady, cold gray, not the silver I associated with calm Veil expression, but a darker, more metallic tone. His face was sharp-boned and completely unreadable. He looked like someone who had decided a very long time ago exactly what he thought about everything, and hadn't revisited those decisions since. I closed the file, went asleep, told myself it didn't matter. It mattered. 11 days later. I was coming out of the secondary fuel staging bay, the same bay where I'd met Sci-Fi the first time, at about 1400 hours. I turned the corner into the junction corridor. There were 4 people in it. 3 sovereignty security personnel in the dark operational uniforms they wore. Different from the standard gray-blue station uniforms, these were charcoal black with a sensor-active trim that I'd been told could read biometrics passively. And Commander Vreth Kalan. He was about what the profile image had suggested. Tall, broad, still in a way that wasn't relaxed stillness but controlled stillness. The kind that comes from absolute certainty that you have all the time you need to decide what to do. He was looking at Sci-Fi. She was standing across from him with her slate held in both hands in front of her, like she'd been doing a task and had been stopped mid-task. Her eyes were a complicated shade, silver with something darker moving underneath. I read the room immediately. Whatever this was, it had been going on before I arrived, and whatever it was not comfortable for her. Kalan was speaking. In Veil, not Pidgin, not the sovereignty common language, but Veil specifically, which I couldn't follow beyond a word or two. His tone was level and precise, and the words fell in clean patterns, but the effect on Sci-Fi was visible. She was very still in the way that people go very still when they're being controlled by something they can't push back against directly. I should have walked past. I know that. I knew it in the moment. It wasn't my business, it wasn't my place. The protocols were not clear on what a human sergeant did when a sovereignty commander was in a corridor. I stopped. Kalon noticed me the way predators notice movement. Not dramatically, just a clean turn of the head, eyes finding me with the flat efficiency of a sensor sweep. I looked at Sci-Fi. Her eyes found mine, just briefly. Something moved in them, not quite relief, but something adjacent to it, a recognition. I looked back at Kalon. I said in Pidgin, "I'm sorry to interrupt, Commander. Specialist Theln, I need your technical assessment on the conduit stress indicator in Corridor D7. It's flagged for review, and I'm told you logged the original observation." Complete silence. Kalon looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were exactly the color they were in the profile image, dark metallic gray, the kind of gray that had no warmth in it anywhere. Then he looked at Sci-Fi. He said something in Vale, short, a single phrase. She answered equally short, still very controlled. He looked back at me. In common sovereignty language, not Pidgin, the actual formal common tongue, which I could understand about 60% of, he said, "Human." "Sir," I said, "you are from the engineering detachment." "Yes, sir." "You have professional business with Specialist Theln." "Yes, sir." Another long pause. Those gray eyes moved over me in a way that felt like a structural assessment, like he was determining my load-bearing capacity. "Then proceed," he said. He stepped aside, not theatrically, just moved, creating the space for us to go where I'd said we were going. I walked towards Sci-Fi. She fell into step beside me without hesitation. We moved down the junction corridor, turned the corner into D corridor, and kept walking until we were past 2 junctions and definitely out of line of sight. Then she stopped. I stopped. She was looking straight ahead for a moment. Then she turned her head and looked at me, and her eyes were doing something I hadn't seen before. The silver had gone through several shades in rapid succession, settling now on something pale gold. "There is no stress indicator to review in D7, she said. "There absolutely is," I said. "I logged it 9 days ago. It's due for review in the next maintenance cycle." She stared at me. "I mean, we don't have to go look at it right now if—" "I am not questioning the indicator," she said. "I am questioning whether you used it as a pretext." "It serves both purposes," I said. Another silence. Her eyes were still that strange pale gold. I realized I hadn't seen gold before. I didn't know what it meant. "What he was saying," she said. "You did not understand. You do not speak Vale." "No," I said. "Then you intervened based on what?" I thought about it honestly. "You were still. You were too still," I said. "And your hands were tight on your slate. And you looked at me for a second when I came around the corner, and I knew it wasn't okay." Her expression was something I couldn't fully read. She was quiet for a long moment. "He is the commanding security officer of this station," she said. "He outranks me considerably." "I know. He will remember your face." "Probably," I said. "He was informing me," she said carefully, "that my pattern of interaction with human integration personnel was inconsistent with sovereignty professional standards, as he defines them. I processed that. He was telling you to stop spending time with me. With any human personnel," she said, "in terms that made the reasoning very clear. Sovereignty integrity, professional boundaries, the appropriate distance to maintain during the integration period." "What did you say back to him? The single phrase?" She looked at me steadily. I said that I understood his position. "Which you didn't agree with." "Which I understood," she said. A precise distinction, very Sci-Fi. I leaned against the corridor wall. The D7 stress indicator was about 30 meters further down, waiting patiently. "You don't have to," I said. "If he makes it difficult your posting, your record you don't have to keep." "Darren," she said. I stopped. She looked at me with those steady, shifting eyes, gold still at the edges. "I will be the one to determine what I do or do not do," she said. "Not Commander Kalon, and not you offering me an exit out of consideration for my career." Said gently, but said absolutely. "Okay," I said. "Good," she straightened slightly. "Show me the D7 stress indicator." We walked down the corridor, I showed her the indicator. She looked at it with her spectral vision, confirmed my read, and suggested a slightly earlier replacement window than I'd logged because she could see stress propagation I couldn't. We walked back together. At the junction, she turned toward the administrative section, and I turned toward engineering. She paused. "Thank you," she said, "for the earlier intervention." "I told you," the indicator genuinely. "Not for the indicator," she said, and walked away. I didn't see Kalon again for 2 weeks. When I did, it was in the main corridor near the command section, and he was moving in the opposite direction with 2 of his security staff. He saw me. I saw him. He gave me the same flat structural assessment look. Then he moved on. I tried to decide what that meant, failed. Here's the thing about Sci-Fi that I couldn't stop thinking about. She was, and I mean this as precisely as possible, the most rigorously honest person I had ever met in my life, human or otherwise. There's a kind of person who tells you what they think as a social performance. They've decided honesty is a virtue they want to be known for, so they deploy it strategically, tell the truth when it costs them nothing, and dress up half-truths as the full version when it does. I'd worked with a lot of people like that. Sci-Fi told the truth because she appeared to be physically incapable of operating any other way, not because it was a virtue she'd chosen, because any other mode of functioning was apparently just not something that computed for her. She wasn't harsh. She wasn't the kind of honest that uses truth as a weapon. She was honest with the kind of care that meant she never said more than she meant and never meant less than she said. This had consequences. About 10 weeks after we'd met, we were in the inventory room, of course the inventory room, and she was telling me about a systems audit she'd done that had revealed a significant equipment cataloging error in her own section. The kind of error that reflected badly on the previous record keeper, who had since been reassigned elsewhere. She'd filed the audit report cleanly, named the discrepancies, let the record stand. "Couldn't you have?" I started. "No," she said simply. "Even two?" "No," she said again. She was looking at a thermal coupling, but she wasn't really seeing it. There is no version of an accurate report that protects someone who kept inaccurate records. If the choice is between accuracy and kindness, accuracy protects more people over more time. The discomfort is local. The damage from inaccuracy spreads. I thought about that for a long moment. "You ever have a moment where you wished you could just be less rigorous?" I asked. "Just for a day?" She looked at me. "No," she said. Then, a beat later, "I have had moments where I wish the world were arranged differently so that rigorous accuracy did not create local discomfort. That is different." "That's a very refined distinction." "It is the correct one," she said without any self-consciousness. And then, because she was Sci-Fi, although I understand why some species find the distinction frustrating rather than helpful. "Am I some species right now?" A pause. "No," she said. "You understand it, you simply do not always like it." She was right, I didn't always like it, but I always respected it. About 13 weeks in, Tomas found me in the break room and sat down with the expression of someone who has news and isn't sure how to frame it. "There's a social event," he said. "Station leadership is organizing a mixed-crew observation dinner. You know, integration effort, looking at the reach, sharing food, bonding across species." "Sounds fine," I said. "Sci-Fi Theln is going," he said. "I checked the attendee list because I was curious." I looked at him. And Commander Kalon is also going." He paused. "And someone in logistics asked me if I'd heard anything about the Vale commander putting in a request to review the personnel records of the human engineering detachment." I put down my coffee substitute. "He's checking up on me," I said. "Seems like it," Tomas said. "Look, I don't know what that means. Might be nothing. Might be standard security procedure. Might be. Might be he's building a case for something," I said. "I didn't say that." "You implied it." He looked at me steadily. "What I'm saying is, the observation dinner is in 4 days. You're invited, and I think you should go, and I think you should be aware of the environment." Same words as before, be aware. "Yeah," I said. "Okay." The observation dinner was held in the station's largest shared common area, a room that was technically called the multi-species integration space on the official station map, and that everyone referred to as the mixer. It ran along one full side of transparent hull on the station's upper level. The view was the Kelvari Reach in all its multi-layered, impossible to fully process glory. The station had made an effort. Long tables arranged in a rough circle so no species had the head position. A food system that offered items from the culinary traditions of every crew species, which meant a long counter of things ranging from familiar to deeply strange. Lighting calibrated to be comfortable for the widest range of visual systems, which in practice meant a warm amber that suited humans well, but was a bit lower than Vale preferred. Someone had hung some textile decorations, a mix of styles, nothing identifiable as belonging to one species only. About 60 people, maybe a quarter human, the rest distributed across the represented species. I saw Varathi in their usual quiet clusters, 3 or 4 Keth tall, four-armed, the species most humans found most physically startling, who were also invariably the most socially relaxed people in any room. A scattering of Javar, which were the smallest represented species, quick-moving and curious, always looking at things with those large trinocular eyes. And Vale, 8 or 9 of them, including Sci-Fi, who was standing near the window wall with 2 other Vale I didn't recognize, looking at the Reach. I got food, mostly recognizable things, although I did try one Keth dish that turned out to be extremely spicy by human standards and circulated. Talked to people I knew. Ended up near the window wall. Sci-Fi saw me and detached from her group with that quiet precision and came over. "You came," she said. "Tomas told me about it," I said. "Corporal Vrek attends these events. He does when he's trying to be socially responsible." Her eyes shifted slightly warmer, amber at the edges. "I see." She looked at the Reach. "It looks different from in here," she said. "The glass filters some of the spectral range." "But it's still something," I said. "Yes," she agreed, "it's still something." We stood there for a moment. Around us, 60 people ate and talked in 7 languages and 3 dozen pidgin variations, and the Kelvari Reach spread out beyond the glass in its slow, patient way. And the room was warm and low-lit and strange and somehow also, at that moment, oddly comfortable. "Sci-Fi," I said. "Yes." I looked at her, she looked at me. This close in the amber light, her eyes were a color I hadn't seen before, a very faint, very warm gray, almost dove-colored, with something quieter in it than I was used to. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Ask." "What are we doing, you and me?" "What is this? What are we to each other?" I said it carefully, the way you say things that matter, because I'd learned from her that saying things carefully was the right way. Because I don't want to assume and I don't want to get it wrong, but I also don't want to pretend I don't know what I feel like when you're around. She was quiet for a moment. The room continued around us, entirely unaware. "What do you feel like when I'm around?" she said, not deflecting, genuinely asking, gathering data. "Like I'm paying better attention," I said. "Like things are more specific, more real, like the day has an edge to it that it doesn't have other times." She turned this over. I watched her process it, not coldly, not clinically, but in her own way, giving it the weight it deserved. "I have a Vale concept," she said slowly. "There is no direct human equivalent translation. The closest approximation in Pidgin is something like the person whose company calibrates your thinking." She paused. "It is considered a significant designation in Vale interpersonal framework." "Calibrates your thinking," I repeated. "When I work on problems alone," she said, "I find the solution, but when I have been talking with you before I work on problems, the solutions come differently, cleaner, faster, as if the conversation has organized my processing." She looked at me steadily. "I have not had that experience with anyone else on this station, or, if I am honest, in some time before that." I was quiet for a moment. Is that good or bad in Vale terms?" "It is," she paused, that careful pause of someone choosing words with precision. "It is the thing that Vale usually notice first about a person who is going to matter," she said. The room kept going around us. I said, "Okay." She said, "Okay." We stood there looking at the Reach. Commander Kalon found us about 20 minutes later. I'd been aware he was in the room. I'd spotted him when I came in, across the space, moving between groups with that controlled stillness. He'd been talking to the station's joint operations lead, then to a group of sovereignty personnel I didn't know. When he came to the window wall, I didn't know if it was deliberate or incidental. He stopped a few meters to our right, looking at the Reach, with the same flat attention he seemed to give everything. Then he said in the common sovereignty language, "Specialist Theln." "Commander," she said. He glanced at me, the structural assessment look, "Sergeant Hollies." The fact that he knew my name without me having introduced myself was not surprising, but was noted. "Commander," I said. He looked at the Reach. "The optical dispersion in this region is extensive," he said. "I find it imprecise." "Sir," I said. "Too many variables to see through," he said. "I prefer open space, fewer distractions." I looked at the Reach, all those layers of gas and light, an ancient process. "I've come to like it," I said. "It takes a while to learn how to see it right." He looked at me then, held it for a moment. "Sergeant," he said, "I reviewed your service record." "I heard something like that might happen," I said. Tomas would have been appalled at my lack of tact. But I was from Tennessee, and I'd rather have it on the table. Kalan's expression, what little it did, adjusted almost imperceptibly. Something registered. Maybe respect for the directness, maybe irritation, maybe both. "Your assessment ratings are high," he said. "Your adaptive protocol scores are in the upper tier for human engineering personnel." "Thank you, sir." "Your incident reports show 2 situations where you intervened in matters outside your direct operational scope." He meant the junction corridor. And something else I suspected he'd found in the records. A situation 6 months before I'd met Sci-Fi, where I'd flagged a structural problem in a section that wasn't my responsibility because I'd walked past it and seen something wrong. "Both times the intervention prevented a larger problem," I said. "That is documented," he agreed. A pause. He looked at Sci-Fi briefly, then back at me. "Vale have a designation for humans we consider to be operating in full integration alignment," he said. "It translates poorly. The approximation is something like calibrated to the work." Sci-Fi was very still beside me. "Vale value that," Kalan continued, "more than many species understand. The human tendency toward intervention based on situational reading, rather than protocol adherence, is considered by some to be undisciplined. I have found, in my assessment of human personnel, that the better ones intervene correctly." He turned and looked at the Reach. For the first time, something in his face shifted, not softening exactly, more like recognition, like looking at something he'd thought about for a long time. "My assessment of Specialist Theln," he said, still looking at the nebula, "includes the observation that she is," he used a veil term. It was short, precise. I didn't know it. Sci-Fi's eyes went through 3 colors in about 2 seconds. Kalan looked at me. "The term has no sufficient common language translation," he said. "But the closest might be, worthy of the best." Silence. "I am the commanding security officer of this station," he continued. "I am also, within Vale's structural designation, the senior organizational authority over Specialist Theln's broader service family group." He paused. I was doing rapid calculations. Service family group, senior authority, not her direct supervisor, something more like a senior kinship role, something between commanding officer and something like an uncle or guardian. "I see," I said carefully. "I reviewed your record," he said, "because it is my responsibility to assess individuals who interact significantly with personnel under my organizational authority. I have done the same for other personnel on this station." He looked at the Reach. "My assessment of Sergeant Hollies is that you are," he used another veil term, "short, similar construction to the first." Sci-Fi made a sound I had never heard from her before. It was very brief. It was not quite a laugh and not quite a breath and not quite a word, but it was something, and it had heat in it. "What does that one mean?" I asked. "It is," Kalan, for the first time, seemed to search slightly for words. "It is the designation for a person assessed to be appropriate to the person they are beside." The mixer went on around us. 60 people, 7 languages, the Kelvari Reach in amber light. "Sir," I said, "if I'm understanding this correctly." "You are not likely in error," he said. He turned away from the window. Looked at us both for a moment, that flat, structural look, but with something different running underneath it now. Something that, in a human face, I might have called deliberate intention. "Vale do not make assessments lightly," he said, "or change them easily." He looked at me. "I am difficult to persuade. I am told this frequently." "I can tell," I said. Something moved in his face, almost nothing, but something. "You are direct," he said. "That is noted positively." He turned toward the room. Then, without looking back, the stress cascade documentation gap in the secondary staging bay has been updated. The corrected protocol is now propagated to all relevant units. A pause. Specialist Theln's correction report was processed within standard priority. The update took longer than it should have. Then he walked away, back into the room, back into the quiet circulation of a commander at a social event, and was gone. Sci-Fi and I stood at the window wall for a moment. "What just happened?" I said quietly. "Commander Kalan," she said, "does not make positive assessments of people he intends to prevent from interacting with other people." I thought about that. I said. "Yes," she said. He called me what was the second term. The approximate translation was appropriate, but that's not exactly. The full translation, she said very carefully, is closer to worthy to stand beside. I looked at her. Her eyes were that color I'd seen earlier in the evening, that warm, quiet dove gray, but warmer now. Much warmer. "He agreed with me," I said. "About what?" "Nothing," I said. "Something I thought to myself earlier." She looked at me, waiting, patient, because she was Sci-Fi and she always gave things the space they needed. "I said it to Tomas," I admitted. "About 2 weeks after I met you. He asked me what I thought of you, and I said I stopped. He said you were spending a lot of time with the Veil girl, and I said she was Specialist Theln, and then later I said she was a wife material." Sci-Fi blinked slowly once. "I said it like a joke," I said, "because I didn't know what else to do with it, because it was too much to say directly, and I was dealing with it." A pause. "And he laughed, and I tried to take it back, and I've been thinking about it since then." Silence the reach. 60 people and 7 languages. "Wife material," she said. "Yeah." She turned it over. I watched her do it, that precise, careful processing. "In Veil," she said slowly, "the nearest equivalent concept is the assessment of someone as a potential primary bond partner. Someone whose presence in your life would make the fundamental architecture of your life better." "Yeah," I said, that's pretty much what I meant." "You said it as a joke," she said, "but you meant it." "I meant it," I said. "I just didn't know how to say it as a real thing yet." She was quiet for a moment. "Darren," she said. "Yeah." "The concept of calibrating thinking," she said. "The person whose company calibrates your thinking. I told you that was a significant designation in Veil interpersonal framework." "Yeah." "It is the thing Veil notice first," she said. "About a person who is going to matter." She looked at the reach, then at me. Those eyes, warm gray, warm gold at the edges, shifting through something I didn't have a name for yet but intended to learn. "I noticed it the second time we spoke," she said. "In the maintenance corridor, when you showed me the stress indicator that I had found." "The second time," I said. "I returned to the conversation 3 times in my own recollection that evening," she said. "That is not standard for me." "No." "No," she looked at me very directly. "I am telling you this because accuracy matters," she said. "And because you were honest about what you said to Corporal Vrek. And because Commander Kalan just stood at this window and effectively told both of us that his assessment is that this is not something he intends to prevent." "The Warlord agrees," I said. "He is not a Warlord," she said. "That is a translation artifact from the rank designation." "He looked pretty Warlord-y when I walked into that junction corridor," I said. "He is," she stopped. The corner of her mouth moved, that almost smile, the one that was mostly in her eyes. "He is significantly more complicated than that," she said. "But also he is somewhat Warlord-y." I laughed. She watched me do it with that filing it away expression. And then she did something I hadn't seen before. She smiled. Not the veil variation, the almost smile. An actual smile. Small, careful, but real. It changed her face completely for the few seconds it lasted. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. We stayed at the window for the rest of the event. Somewhere behind us, Commander Vreth Kalan ate something from the Keth food section and talked to the station operations lead and did not look at us again. But he also didn't need to. The assessment was already made. This is the part where most stories would tell you that everything after that was simple. It wasn't. There were protocols to navigate, and there were people on both the human and sovereignty side who had opinions, and there were forms, an astounding number of forms, as it turned out, because the coalition had anticipated this eventually and built a framework for it, which meant there was paperwork. And there were 2 more conversations with Kalan that were brief and precise and significant in ways I was still processing. And there was the slow, careful business of 2 people from entirely different worlds learning to actually be in each other's lives, which is always complicated regardless of species, and is frankly even more complicated when one of you can see thermal stress in metal, and the other one grew up fixing diesel trucks in Tennessee. But when I think about the moment it became real, when the possibility of it stopped being something I was managing privately and became something actual, I think about standing at a window in a room full of 60 people speaking 7 languages, with the Kelvari Reach spread out behind the glass in its impossible colors, and a commander of the sovereignty looking at me and saying, in the language that mattered to him, that I was worthy to stand beside. And I think about silver eyes in amber light, going warm. And I think, the galaxy is genuinely enormous, and I'm just an engineer from Knoxville who's good with his hands and honest about what he means. But sometimes that's exactly enough. I told Tomas what happened. A few days later in the break room, with the same coffee substitute and the same 5 o'clock shadow. He listened to the whole thing, then he sat back. "You said wife material, and the Vale Warlord commander agreed," he said. "He's not a warlord," I said. "Translation artifact." Tomas stared at me for a long moment. "Hollies," he said, "only you." "I know," I said. "You didn't even mean for any of this to happen." "I was trying to fix a manifest corruption at 4 in the morning," I said. He picked up his coffee. "You know," he said, "the universe is incredibly strange." "Yeah," I said. "It really is." I looked out the porthole across the break room. Just a small circle of transparent hull, this one not the wide expanse of the observation corridor or the mixer's full window wall. Just a small window. But through it, the faint edge of the Reach was visible, the layers of blue and green and deep violet. Somewhere on the station, Sci-Fi was doing her systems check, logging accurate reports, seeing things in metal that no human eye could see. Later, she'd find me in the inventory room, and we'd disagree about the load specifications on a conduit coupling, and she'd be right, and I'd tell her she was right, and she'd accept this without gloating because that's who she was. And somewhere on the station, Commander Vreth Kalan would be running security operations with the precision and controlled stillness of someone who had decided, a long time ago, what he valued and who deserved to be called worthy. I apparently had been placed in that category, which meant more to me than I would have expected. The Kelvari Reach doesn't care about any of this, of course. It just keeps doing what it does, light through gas, colors across millions of kilometers, slow and patient and older than any of us. But I think if it had an opinion, it would say, some things are worth seeing from a window. Some things are worth the time it takes to learn how to look. And some things begin with a manifest corruption at 4 in the morning, and end with an alien girl's eyes going warm in amber light. Which is, when you think about it, exactly the kind of thing the universe enjoys arranging.